I'm going solo from Cooperstown this week. John is on vacation. Jayson Stark will join me to talk about the latest Hall of Fame class and all things Cooperstown from this year. I'm going to talk a lot about Pete Alonso and the Los Angeles Dodgers. We'll play hit and error at the end if you stick with us on the show with Joel Sherman and John Heyman.
Hey, Yankee fans, spring training is here and not to be missed. The New York Post has partnered with TrueFan Travel to build the ultimate Yankee fan experience this spring down in Clearwater Beach, Florida. TrueFan Travel is offering a 5-night stay at the Hilton Clearwater Beach Resort, tickets to 2 Yankee spring training games, and a meet and greet with former Yankee Lou Piniella. I've known Lou for almost 4 decades. He's a great storyteller. He would be a great person to be around to hear all the great stuff. I'll tell you one good Lou Piniella story that I really like. Lou was the manager of the Yankees a few times, obviously, 86 to 88. He didn't leave the organization. George Steinbrenner loved Lou Piniella. And so Lou stayed. MSG was broadcasting the games then, and Lou was part of the broadcast team in 1989. But because of who he was stature-wise in the Yankee organization and how everyone knew he was so close to George Steinbrenner, Lou decided that year he would never go in the clubhouse because it would look like maybe he was trying to Bigfoot or get the job, and he stayed out of the clubhouse. Dallas Green was the manager. Bucky Dent finished out that year after Dallas Green was fired. Lou stayed out, and you know what? It worked perfect for him. The Yankees didn't rehire Lou. The Reds hired Lou, and in 1990, the Reds won the World Series with Lou Piniella as their manager. So I'm sure Lou could regale you with stories about the Reds, how he used the Nasty Boys, but certainly his time as a player and manager of the Yankees. So join us on this special 5-day extravaganza from March 16th to 21st with access to an all-inclusive St. Patrick's Day party that includes food, drinks, and live entertainment. Yankee fans, you will not want to miss this trip of a lifetime. For more details, go to truefantravel.com or click on the link in the description below.
All right, so I'm going to try something I haven't tried before while doing this podcast. I'm flying solo. My partner and friend John Heyman is on vacation this week. I believe he'll be back with us next week, and that will probably take us right through spring training in the season where we're both doing shows regularly together again. Look, I feel like there's 2 major storylines right now, one local, one national. It's the Mets and Pete Alonso and the Dodgers taking their payroll up near $400 million. I want to start with the Mets and Pete Alonso. Pete Alonso, to me, is a bit of a victim of his time. If this was 10, 15, certainly 20 years ago, his home run totals alone would net him a big contract. The reality is the sport has changed. It's turned against corner players, namely first basemen. It's turned against non-athletes. It's turned against guys who can't bring big end defense. And it's turned against guys who are already in their 30s. And it certainly is turned against it if you're run by somebody like David Stearns, who has shown in his 2 years running the Mets now. If you're in your 20s and high end, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, Juan Soto, he made big offers to both and obviously landed Soto. Those were guys in their 20s. He was going to get more prime years out of them. He's not going to suggest that this kind of player get a big deal for big money, especially long-term money. So he was in this 3-year window of what he was willing to do. It was more in the frame, apparently, of 22, 23, 24, 25 million. Pick your pick where they were. And I know Met fans are very upset. Many Met fans are very upset that this hasn't gotten to the finish line. But I would say there's been a lot of free agents who've been signed so far this offseason. There's still a lot out there. Alonso hasn't signed because the way the Mets look at him is there is groupthink. There is lockstep in the industry. And it isn't like anyone is breaking out and saying, I'd like Pete Alonso for $30 million a year, or I'd like Pete Alonso for 5, 6, 7 years, or whatever the dream was for a player who in June of 2023 was offered a 7-year, $158 million extension. That would have been the last year of arbitration in 2024, and then 6 years of free agency. So let's say basically a 6-year, $135 million for free agency would have been in there. And that it wasn't. like that, it feels like that's gone. Like Pete will have to make that kind of money maybe over a couple of contracts into his mid 30s. That was a different agent. He's since switched to Scott Boras. That was a different Met baseball operations. It was under Billy Epler. This is David Stearns. And I just think the Stearns model has been shown, and we'll see over the long term now whether it goes. But I will add one last thing about this. To me, maybe the door is slammed, but right now, Pete Alonso is still a free agent. And I would remind everybody, in the last days of February last year, Cody Bellinger signed a 3-year contract to stay with the Cubs after, he had been a Cub the year before. He had a very successful season, kind of went out, couldn't get what he wanted, and signed one of these 3-year contracts with 2 opt-outs in it that I think was very much how the Mets had structured their offer to Alonso. That is the last days of February. In the last days of March last year, I don't think the Mets had this kind of overall plan that they were going to sign JD Martinez. But at some point, Martinez's price fell to a point, and the Mets still kind of needed a bat that they said, all right, let's just go do this because what's the downside? And so, with that being said, I don't know if the Mets have closed the door. I don't know if Alonso said, I'm so mad I won't go back. But I don't think it's impossible when we see what happened. And by the way, JD Martinez and Cody Bellinger are both Scott Boras clients. And this is what happened to them late last February and late last March. We are still only in the third week of January here. It feels like game over, but is it game over? I don't know. Because I think part of the other question is there have been people who have had associations with the Mets who are suggesting that this offseason that Steve Cohen has created something that looks like a budget, or maybe even has a budget. As we're speaking, after doing agreements with Jesse Winker and AJ Minter, the Mets are in the very high $290 million projection for the luxury tax threshold. The highest level is 301 million. That's the fourth level, the one that get called the Steve Cohen tax. And every penny over 301 now gets taxed at 110%. The Mets were at about 350 last year. So if they're at say 295 now, we're at 350 last year. Is the budget say 320, 325? I don't know. Is it 310? Is there no budget? Can they trade somebody like Starlin Marte to create even more budget if there is a budget? I just think Met fans should recognize that they are not to opening day yet. We're not even to the opening of spring training. There's a lot of free agents out there. The Mets are motivated to try to be as good as they can be in 2025 within the context of not wanting to close up future payroll and close up future positions except for stars. So I think they're still going to be busy. Does busy include Pete Alonso? I would think not. But until that door is completely slammed, I'll hold out some thought that could happen. And one reason why I think the Mets are still trying to limit what they do long term is because the Mets, Steve Cohen said this at his introductory press conference, that his thought is he would like to be like the Dodgers. What the Dodgers were in his mind were a team that over time that had built such a good infrastructure, farm system, decision making, that they would produce great players to useful players constantly that would allow them to make trades, to fill in holes, etc., and also allow them, when necessary, to use their big hedge fund money. They have it with Guggenheim. The Mets have it with Steve Cohen to go get the Freddie Freemans, the Mookie Betts, the Shohei Otanis. And as we've seen in this cycle with Sasaki, and they haven't stopped, Tanner Scott, and it looks like they're signing Kirby Yates, and they're going to have a payroll up near $400 million, which means a tax well over $100 million. They're going to be all in at over $500 million. And I know there's a lot of people who are talking about that this is kind of the death of baseball, why there's a salary cap needed, etc. And I hear your pain and your argument. But the reality is we still haven't had a repeat champion since the Yankees of 1998 to 2000. The Dodgers have made the playoffs 12 years in a row. They've won 2 championships. Championships are hard to win. It's hard to get through it. No doubt, feels like the Dodgers' magic number is 0. Like they've already won the NL West. But let's see what this looks like. They had a lot of starting pitching last year, and then they got to the postseason and they're using openers and like punting games because the season had attrition on their starting pitching and they ran out. Let's see what happens during the course of the year. I have one problem with the Dodgers, and it's not with the Dodgers. The Dodgers are doing this by following the rules. I think the rule that needs to change is they have over $1 billion in deferred money. There's no problem deferring money, but the deferment takes the average value of a contract down. I don't want to do too much math here, but the luxury tax is determined by the current value of a deal. So they signed Ohtani for $700 million. They deferred $680 million of it. So for luxury tax purposes, he's costing roughly, say, $46-47 million. And so that creates more room for them under the tax to not be penalized heavily. I think you should be allowed to defer money, but if you sign the guy to what is ultimately a 10-year, $700 million contract, he needs to count $70 million a year towards the tax. All these players that they are deferring, they need to cost whatever it is, because then I think it's a much harder decision for the Dodgers to keep stocking it unless they'd like their tax bill to go up to $200 million, which I'm not sure they'd be willing to do. So I think that, but while these are the rules, the Dodgers are motivated buyers. We are looking at a marketplace where there's not a lot of teams saying the ultimate goal is to win. The Dodgers are full throttle, and I do think what it's done is it has created a Goliath that everyone will have their eyes on this year, and that if you're not a Dodger fan, you are now the sworn enemy of the Dodgers. And I think what you want in sports, all sports always, is passion. The death of sports is indifference. So you're going to have the fans who love them as much as ever because of what they're doing, and everyone else is going to hate them at the 400 million plus level. And I actually think that's good for baseball. And the Mets, no matter what they did this offseason, couldn't look like the Dodgers on paper unless Steve Cohen said, I'm willing to go to a $500 million payroll. So I think what they need to do, the Mets, is be as good as possible, figure their way in the playoffs, and see what the Dodgers look like then and if they could match up. There's a long way from now to July 31st. We already know players like Sandy Alcantara are going to get traded in July. Ryan Helsley's probably going to get traded in July. There's be ways to make your team better from today until July 31st. The Mets can't get to the Dodgers today, but over the course of the season, can they build a team that beats them in October? And over the long term, can the vision of Cohn and Stearns build on the East Coast what the Dodgers have built on the West Coast? It's a we'll see. But in the present, Jayson Stark joins me next to talk Hall of Fame. Well, I can't tell you how pleased I am to be joined by my friend Jayson Stark, a Spink Award winner. He is a Hall of Famer. We're both up here in Cooperstown. It is a day after the announcement. Billy Wagner, Ichiro Suzuki, CC Sabathia have gone in the Hall of Fame. Carlos Beltran and Andrew Jones just missed. Some nice hops up by people like Andy Pettit and Chase Utley. And one of the reasons, besides that he's a good friend, is I honestly don't think anybody does the work Jayson does. And there's lots of people who do work for the Hall of Fame, and I don't think anybody thinks about it, writes about it, and really has analysis on it like Jayson. So Jayson, and by the way, I love doing television with Jayson from up here because of it. It really challenges you to do it. Jayson, we've talked a lot in the last 48 hours, you and me, about something that I'm a little obsessed on, which is a little off the beaten path of, and we will get to the 3 Hall of Famers. But because Sabathia has gotten in with his 3,500-ish innings, and we know at some point Scherzer, Verlander, Kershaw, maybe Greinke will get in. We're about to hit a run here where we're going to have to think about what is a starting pitcher Hall of Famer in a way that maybe during our lives as writers, we had to think, what is a relief pitcher who should get in the Hall of Fame? Because none had really gotten in. So, Jason, take that wherever you want, because I know we've talked about it quite a bit. I think we're talking about it quite a bit more on the network today. What do you think about where starting pitching in the Hall of Fame is and is heading?
Joe, first of all, thank you for the kind words. It is so much fun to be up here with you and talk about this stuff. We could do it for hours, for days, and what do you know? That's what we're actually doing. So it's been awesome. Okay, to your question. Usually you're the alarmist and I'm the
Voice
guy
of reason. You could say it.
see, I'm the voice of reason. I see the sunshine where you see the clouds. But I've had this thought. What if, after that group you just mentioned, there is no such thing as a Hall of Fame starting pitcher anymore? I mean, we've known for a long time what a Hall of Fame starter looked like, and that beast is going to cease to exist. So then what? Are we going to redefine it or are we just going to ignore it? I don't know the answer. I just know that we'll probably never see another 300 game winner. There's one pitcher under 35 who's within 150 wins, and that's Garrett Cole. He's got what, 153. So he
I
ain't
would say
won
he'll have
300.
some struggles just to get to 200.
For sure.
And then he'll be, we talk about Verlander becoming the last 300 game winner. I think Cole has a chance for a very, very long time to be the last 200 game
He
winner.
might.
I think we both wrote about this, which is players 30 or younger, like the most who pitched at 30 or younger last year. The most wins was like 65-ish by Herman Marquez, or Aaron Nola in that same spot. So we're talking about guys who have thrown a lot of innings and they're still 130 to 140 wins away from even getting to 200. I'm not sure either get to 100.
All right. So Brian Kenny's won. We've killed the win. Okay. We haven't killed it yet, but we're about to kill the win. I don't know if every starting pitcher has gotten the memo, but it's got to be dawning on them. Um, and so if the definition of a dominant horse type starter is 140 wins or 150 wins, does that mean anything? Or are we just going to look at everything else? I don't know. I don't know the answer. Maybe you have the answers. I just know we are not that far away from radically changing one of the most important and iconic positions on the field, maybe number one. Hey, Joel, I had a friend of mine texted me last weekend who said, something occurred to me. The pitching matchups in the NFL are now better than the pitching matchups in Major League Baseball. It might be true, right? We have Josh Allen against Patrick Mahomes. He might be right.
Well, I mean, I would think of it like this, Jason. It's kind of tied into our game today. Think about the explosion of interest when you wrote about the Golden at Bat recently. And
Yeah.
ultimately, the Golden at Bat is two purposes, right? Like to see if you can get your best hitter up in a dramatic spot, but it's also they're trying to tie it, right? I think there are some, or is that just the double hook also, right? Things like this are being tied to trying to get the starting pitcher to go longer. Like we are trying to bring the starting pitcher back because we just don't have starting pitching. Like the Dodgers won the World Series. I dare say if the Yankees hold on to a 5-0 lead in game 5, the Dodgers might be cooked because they had run out of pitching. It's there are more pitchers, 13 a staff, and less pitching than ever before. And that's in part because starters don't go innings. They don't pitch often. The Dodgers that have going to spend 400 million in payroll and then over 100 million in tax, they're going to a 6-man rotation. You talk about limiting innings, and these are like the star pitchers in the games that we'll be considering 15, 20 years from now if we're so lucky to still be around and voting on these kind of guys like is not Otani because he's both things. He'll get in the Hall of Fame, but like Yamamoto and Glass now, like who's a Hall of Famer? It's going to be that. To put a finer point on it, I used the stat yesterday on TV. Aaron Nola and Garrett Cole are horses today. They're horses.
Yeah.
They have 2 fewer innings combined than CC Sabathia threw in his career. Those are our horses. And You know what I think? So I think two things about the future of starting pitching, and I wonder what you think about it. Number one, I wonder if we almost have to say, go to the Hall of Fame and say, hey, can we get a mulligan and get some people back on the ballot? Because I think we think about David Cohn and Johan Santana, for example, were both one and done. There is no shot in the world they'd be one and done now. Like their overall record, their innings pitch would stand out to some degree, especially Cohn's, and their run prevention would stand out. And the fact that both were aces, high-end aces, Cy Young Award winners in Santana's case, multiple. And I just think that was a mistake. They were one and done. And then I just think are the guys who are currently on the ballot, Felix Hernandez, who was an ace, but for a short time, and Mark Burley and Andy Pettit, who were high-end number twos for a long time. Do There's a lot here I just said, Jason, but I just wonder, do we just think about them all differently now? And it's like, well, in a world of Walter Johnson and Cy Young, Mark Burley's not a Hall of Famer, but what in a world where I have to start thinking about Corbin Burns 15 years from now?
Yeah, I don't know what to tell you about where we're going to be in 10 or 15 years. I just know that we're going to be living in such a different universe. And Hall of Fame voting has always been about rolling with it and adapting to the moment. I look back on Cohn and Johan, and those were just awful one and dones. I don't see any chance that the Hall is interested in restoring anybody to the ballot. Like I'm that guy. I brought this up at a BBWA meeting one time and tried to bring up examples like this and got shouted down, and it never went anywhere. And I don't think the Hall is interested in this. But I do wonder if when you think about the glamour uh, of starting pitching and what it's always represented in the sport, if maybe even the Hall of Fame in a few years is going to look at what's ahead and think maybe we should give these guys another shot. I don't know what the process would be, but man, is it worth having the conversation?
Yeah, I've been for a long time advocate that no one should fall off the ballot for 3 years. And then if you don't have, say, make a number, 10%, 15% combined,
Yeah.
for those 3 years, you've like all it means is having more names on a ballot. And I'm okay with that. And, make a decision this way in case you have a very crowded ballot one year and a guy falls off because he was everyone's X choice, but he couldn't get on your 10 or whatever. He at least gets a couple of shots at this to see if he could accumulate towards 75%. Look, we've beaten this a little bit. I think we're going to talk about it in years to come as important a subject as any. But we did have three people get in. Ichiro Suzuki missed by one vote of being a unanimous choice, which would have put him with Mariano Rivera as the only unanimous, the first ever position player who would have been unanimous. The witch hunt has begun for who didn't vote for him. Why? I doubt that person will show his face. They didn't when one vote didn't go to Derek Jeter. So I certainly talk about your thoughts about unanimous, but I just want to make one thought about Ichiro that sticks with me now. Ricky Henderson passed away recently, and there is no player I enjoy. The two players I have enjoyed watching the most, hitter and pitcher, are Pedro and Ricky. And it's funny when you can think about a player by one name. Pedro is Pedro Martinez. Ricky is Ricky Henderson. You don't need the back name. Ichiro is like that, right? He's just Ichiro. And Ichiro would probably be someplace second, third, fourth on that list for me. I just loved to watch him play baseball. He did it with flair, style, confidence, and different. There was not a robotic, oh, everyone is doing it this way. And I loved watching Ichiro. So Ichiro, unanimous, go.
Yeah, Ichiro, one of the most unique, most charismatic players that I can ever remember coming into our sport. And he still got that thing. I remember talking to Justin Hollander, who's the general manager of the Mariners earlier this winter, and somehow Ichiro's name came up, and he said, people go crazy when Ichiro runs out on our field before a game now. So think of what it was 20 years ago. And you always had that feeling when Ichiro came to bat, when he was on base, when a ball was hit to him and there was a runner on first, that you were about to see something that would take your breath away. Um, I know we vote on using numbers. I know we vote using OPS plus. I know we vote using wins above replacement and a lot of modern metrics. None of that captures that wow factor of Ichiro. And so we don't know why whoever it was left Ichiro off the ballot. Um, in the end, it doesn't matter a whole lot. It's the 99.7% is a ton of votes. It's basically tied with Jeter for the most ever by a position player, so the most ever by an outfielder. And it's a good time to celebrate Ichiro, but it's such a disappointment because of what it could have meant globally for our sport. I can't get past that part of it. This is an election for the ages anyway. He's a candidate for the ages anyway. July is going to be an all-time induction weekend because of him and the presence of CC and the long wait of Wagner, Parker, Allen. But this is Ichiro's time, and he deserved to be unanimous. So let me ask you, if not him, who, when, why? If not Ichiro, will any
Well, the
position player
answer
ever
is,
be
Jason,
unanimous?
Jason, the answer is it's not really explicable because we've certainly, how would you make your case against Ken Griffey not being
None. There's no reason.
unanimous? How would you make your case against Derek Jeter not being unanimous? How would you make your case against Randy Johnson, Greg Maddux, scores of other people? So somehow we don't get to it. I will share this though, and I thought about it last night because I have made less of the unanimous because I just think there's always we're living in a polarized world now more than ever. And we realized that it's like if I came up with a pill that would clean all the water on earth, somebody would form the Dirty Water Association and try to shout me down, right? Like, so there's nothing that we all agree on. And I remember telling like Bobby Valentine, who I liked very much when he was manager of the Mets, he used to obsess on everyone who hated him. And I'd say, Bobby, if you walked into a room of 100 people and 98 loved you, you would not spend your time with 98% of the people who love you. You'd spend time trying to convince the other two people to love you. And I think you're going to fail and make your day miserable. And I feel like chasing down this vote or non vote is going to make us all miserable instead of celebrating that somehow baseball writers who we've been around for decades who can't agree on freaking anything 365 out of 366 or 364 out of 365. I forget what the final head count was, or 396 it was, right? 396 was the final number. 395 out of 396.
393 out of 394.
Right. So in there, like,
Yeah.
that's staggering. It's staggering.
It-
Yes, it's staggering that some fool didn't vote for Ichiro, but I'd rather be somehow in a polarized world, 393 out of 394 people agreed on something.
yeah. Uh, Two things. The first is the idea that we can't elect somebody unanimously. It's just the dumbest tradition in sports. So we should be better than that. We should not keep this tradition alive. I do think that, but 99% is such a landslide. And it brings me back to something a point you've been making over the last 2 days, which is baseball writers didn't used to vote even this way. We've now had four players in the last 10 years get 99% or greater. Mariano, obviously, Jeter, Ichiro, and Ken Griffey was 3 votes away from unanimity. You know how many players in the history of Hall of Fame elections had gotten 99% before that period of time? That would be none. Baseball writers never even voted this way before. Joe DiMaggio, the first year he was on the ballot, got 44% of the vote. Okay, so at least, as you've been saying, we're now, most of us, looking for reasons to vote for someone and not against someone or to leave them off our ballot. So we're not getting any credit for that. So we just did.
why don't we flip to Billy Wagner, who ran the Odyssey, 10 years on the ballot, got in on the last one, was, anybody who saw either when he got the phone call or did some of his interviews yesterday, he was very emotional, came to tears, and it's understandable. This is the epitome. People want to get here. You want to get to the majors, you want to become a star, you want to make money. And then if you're kind of the elite of the elite, this is the dream. Transparency, I never voted for Billy Wagner. I had a problem with innings totals. Like whenever everyone says, oh, he's number one at this for anyone with 900 innings. And I'd say, how about 905 innings? Is that, and no, not for 905 innings. And so I think there was an innings issue. I know that there was a brevity of postseason, but I think one of the reasons for brevity of postseason was he wasn't a very good postseason pitcher. And so he kind of didn't win some games, helped win some games that could have been won. I think he came into 10 games that were either tied or his team was ahead and gave up runs in six of them, which wasn't like regular season. Uh, Billy Wagner, who was dominant. And it was not an easy no vote or an easy not check mark. The Hall of Fame is not made lesser because Billy Wagner's here. He was a great player. To me, I'm always saying, what's the difference between the 1%? You're better than 98% all time. In my opinion, I think you got to be better than 99. I'm a tougher Hall of Fame voter than most, but you have eloquently made the case for Billy Wagner and voted for him. So thoughts on Billy Wagner?
Um, I know that the reason to not vote for Billy is the postseason ERA, which is over 10. And nobody should pretend that didn't happen. And I don't pretend it didn't happen either. But when I look at a player and try to determine, is he a Hall of Famer or not? I try to ask myself, did this player have a claim to historic greatness? Billy Wagner had a claim to historic greatness. Number one among all left-handed pitchers of the live ball era in a few categories you probably heard of: ERA, opponent average, opponent OPS, whip, and strikeout rate. Number one. As our friend Brian Kenny always says, we're not talking about number 8. We're not talking about number 12. We're not talking about he was the 40th best. He was first. That sounds like historic greatness to me. And so then the only other question is the point you also raised, which is, was there enough volume to consider that to be meaningful? And I think within the context of his position, relief pitching, which is in fact an actual job in our sport, my answer is yes, that it's just not fair to compare him and his volume to starting pitchers. It's not even fair to compare him and his volume to the relief pitchers of previous generations. I mean, his innings compared to Goose Gossage's innings, it's not close. But I think you can only judge a player based on what he was asked to do in his time and the way his job was defined for him in his time. And within that context, was Billy Wagner a historically significant player? I think it's an unequivocal yes. But it wasn't easier. It wouldn't have taken 10 years.
Yeah, I think that in some ways, the starting pitcher question we were asking, where less volume is going to become the kind of norm, less volume probably for relief pitchers, certainly from a certain time, might become the norm, and he becomes an easier Hall of Famer, even for me to imagine. Look, we talked about starting pitching a lot, so that covers CC. So before we end this, I wonder if we could both champion somebody who didn't get in. I'm going to champion someone. And then, unfortunately, because this is my show, I want you to make the case because I think you have made the best Jimmy Rollins case for his accumulation of stats. Uh, and I hover over Jimmy Rollins every year. I actually want to get to yes. And nobody has influenced me getting closer to it than you. Let
Wow.
me just very quickly do a Carlos Beltran he didn't get in. I expect he's going to get in next year. He got a little over 70% of the vote. Usually you get there. He has more time. We have a very weak ballot next year where the best guys on it are Ryan Braun and Cole Hamels coming in. I expect him, Andrew Jones to get in. I expect that even Chase Utley will take a giant jump, maybe someone like Ron. So, but just very quickly on Carlos Beltran. The case I've always made is there's been this whole class of center fielders who are under Ken Griffey who are hurt by that. Ken Griffey played, and it was like, look at him. That's what a Hall of Fame center fielder looks like. And
Yeah.
Kenny Lofton quickly fell off the ballot, and Bernie Williams did, and Jim Edmonds did, and Andrew Jones hasn't gotten on, and Torrey Hunter, and Johnny Damon, and Mike Cameron, and Steve Phil. I mean, these are brilliant center fielders. Of all of them, the most talented and productive to me was Carlos Beltran. He could do everything on a baseball field. And then if I'm going to say I did ding Billy Wagner for the postseason, I am a big like wins above replay. People win. I'm like, right, but like we're actually watching who's helping the teams win. Well, Carlos Beltran is one of the most brilliant postseason players of all time. The list of guys with an OPS better than him, OPS plus better than him in history with 150 plate appearances in the postseason are fellas named Ruth Gehrig and George Brett. And he's literally the highest percentage in stolen bases for anyone with 200 steals in history. So I think he's a Hall of Famer without that. But like, here's two things he's historically great at. Easy vote for me every year. And I think he gets in. If you'd like to comment on that, comment. But your Jimmy Rollins case is articulated so well. And I want you to make it. And you saw him because you're a Philly guy, plays so much.
Yes, because I'm from Philadelphia, I've known Jimmy since he was 21 years old. And so I saw his entire career up close. And I spent a lot of time talking to that guy, around that guy, saw what he meant to the teams he played on. So there's all of that. There's this cool thing going on now, Joel, where he and Chase Utley are on this ballot together. There's never been a double play combination in the history of our sport that played more games together and also appeared on the Hall of Fame ballot together because Trammell and Whitaker somehow never did. And when those two players retired, if you polled Philadelphians, if you could only vote for one, which one was the Hall of Famer? I think Jimmy Rollins would win, not unanimously, but overwhelmingly. And so it's really interesting that now that they're both on the ballot, Utley has more than twice as many votes as Rollins. There's a lot of reasons for that. And I think Chase Utley really fits our current definition of what a Hall of Famer looks like or is going to look like moving forward. All the data points work in his favor. Jimmy doesn't have that. I'll explain why in a second. But what he does have is a career unlike any shortstop who has ever played baseball. MVP, 4 Gold Gloves, won a World Series. How many shortstops in history could say that? Only one. That's him. 2,400 hits. Let me think if I could do the home runs right. 200 homers, 400 steals, 800 extra base hits. How many shortstops in history can say that? None. Only him. Longest hitting streak by a shortstop in the modern era, 38 games. The most hits in the history of his franchise. So there's all of that. And he did it within the context of winning. I know what he meant to a team that for 5 years, the 2007 to 2011 Phillies, as all Mets fans remember, were a behemoth. They won more games every year than the year before. They averaged 8 more wins a year than any team in their league over 5 years. And Rollins and Utley were the heartbeat of that team. So why doesn't he have the data points, Joel? I think there are two things. One, like Ichiro, he didn't walk. His mindset was, I'm going to make something happen. And it means I'm going to swing at more pitches than the average hitter and certainly the average leadoff hitter. But it was all about, I'm going to make something happen in a big moment. So there was that. The other part is the defense. For some reason, the defensive metrics have never reflected what Jimmy Rollins was defensively. And recognize that a lot of these metrics are retroactive now, but Chase Utley willed himself into being a great second baseman, and the metrics make him look like a far superior defensive player than Jimmy Rollins. And yet, if you asked every player on those teams, who would you rather have the ball hit to? It would be 90%, 95%. Oh, absolutely, Jimmy. Jimmy had the clock in his head. He had just an amazing baseball IQ, defensive IQ, feel for every moment. And his teams knew that when the ball was hit to him, it was an out. I don't know how you quantify that, but it's never shown up in his defensive metrics, which means it's never shown up in his wins above replacement, which means that voters who look only at wins above replacement, they don't vote for that guy. But he had an incredible and singular career for a team that was great because he was on it.
Yeah, it's a great case. I mean, it is the case. And I read you every year, make the case.
Yeah.
I listen to you. You know, you're a phone call for me every year for the Hall of Fame. Like I'm probably going to get there at some point. And the reason if Jimmy Rollins gets in by one vote, we could tell him you're the reason. Uh, Jason, you're obviously the reason a lot of people care this much about the Hall of Fame. Nobody, again, nobody writes about it as often and as intelligently as you do. Um, I hate to do this, Jason. I was supposed to ask you before this if you would stick for the last segment where we play hit or error. I pick something, you pick something. Would you stick with us for hit or error at the end of
Why
this?
the heck not?
Why the heck not? I sprung it on Jason. Let's see what it comes up with. Stick with us on the show with Joel Sherman and John Heyman. Well, on the spur of the moment, we're playing hit or error, Jason. What do you got for me? A hit or an error?
All right, let's look at the Hall of Fame voting. My last spot in the ballot, Joel, I came down to Felix Hernandez or Andy Pettit. I thought I was going to vote for Felix. I wound up voting for Pettit, but I was praying that Felix cleared that 5% bar, and he actually cleared the 20% bar. So next year we just had 1,000 ballot slots open up. If you're gonna ask me who is that going to benefit the most, I think Felix is one of the people at the top of the list, and I'm so grateful that we figured that out. He's going to live to appear again. I'll get a chance to vote for him, and that would be a hit in my book.
Yeah, it's a good hit. I think it brings us full circle to what we talked about at the beginning when we were about how we view starting pitching. And I wonder, as he stays on the ballot, if we feel better and better about him when we like, oh, look at his innings, look at his win total, like old style stuff.
And look at his peak.
And his peak, which was kind of like very similar to CC's peak for
Yeah.
that 6, 7, 8 years of where they were really both elite pitchers. CC extended it longer. I do think he'll be helped by it. I think he'll be helped by a weak ballot next year. I think we have a whole new group of voters coming on, so we'll be curious what they do. But I agree with you. I'm glad the three I hovered over and didn't vote for were Felix, Pedroia, and Rollins. And with a weak class coming in and only two holdovers for me, Utley and Beltran, I will think seriously about all three. I'll think seriously about everybody, but those three guys even more again for next year. For hit or error, I want to get off the Hall of Fame ballot for a second. I just want to give an error to the Pittsburgh Pirates. Uh, it's a reminder that they play Major League Baseball. I know they can't do it at the level that the Dodgers do, but you're given this blessing that's Paul Skeens to round out what is a very, very strong rotation in a not very strong division in which like the Cardinals are rebuilding, the Cubs haven't fully figured out how to use their finances, the Reds don't get out of their way, the Brewers use smoke and mirrors and stats and metrics to be good. Like it's okay to try to win. And right now when you're kind of projecting Isaiah kind of Falefa as your number one hitter and Joey Bart as your number five hitter, you need to do better. Paul Skeens is on the clock. Unfortunately, guys who throw like him have injuries, and guys who are going to make the kind of money he makes don't stay in Pittsburgh. So there's a clock ticking to when he either leaves through free agency or you have to trade him before he leaves through free agency. And to not take advantage of that and sign somebody. Hey, by the way, Pete Alonso's still out there. Jurickson Profar's still out there. Like, go, like, Jurickson Profar leading off looks a heck of a lot better than Isaiah Kiner-Falefa. Pete Alonso hitting fourth so that Andrew McCutchen and Joey Bart could move further down in the lineup look good. It's okay to try to actually win. And if you have the gift of Paul Skeens, please go ahead and do it. Act
Yeah.
like you're in Major League Baseball.
Yeah, I have friends who are Pirates fans. You just can't even comprehend their pain of trying to convince themselves that they care
Right.
about what is happening.
They
They're
need to hire
so
Mike
angry.
Tomlin so they can figure out how to get into the playoffs every year.
They almost played 500 last year, not trying, not
Right.
trying. And I honestly thought from talking to their people a year ago, this was going to be the year they were going to step that up. And maybe I'm missing something. I haven't seen any stepping.
Oh.
It's
Or up.
no upping either. Like there's like 140 unsigned free agents left. Spring training hasn't started yet. I'm sure they think if they wait it out, they'll be able to pluck some guys out of the bargain bin, and that's right. But
Yes.
there's such an opportunity. And the Paul Skeens service clock, by the way, just accelerated because he won Rookie of the Year award. So he got
So
that
got a
full year
full
of
year.
service,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah. Spencer
the
Horowitz
window's
is
even
not
shorter
enough.
now because of that.
Yeah. Spencer Horowitz, acquiring Spencer Horowitz is not enough to say that you did something for your offense. And they probably need some work on their bullpen also. Come on, Pittsburgh, try. It's a great baseball town. As we saw, baseball towns could regenerate. Look what happened in Kansas City and Detroit this year. Like, it's go for it a little bit. Jason, we did this at the last second, both to do the show and especially to play hit and error at the end. I thank you so much for joining us. I thank Tommy Hogan, our producer, who always helps us because we're always trying to thread the needle of when we can do the show. And Tommy's great in helping us get it done. Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts, please rate and review. New York Post Sports YouTube page, give us a view. And I think I'm getting my pal John Heyman. I'm sorry, Jason, you're out. I think I'm getting Heyman back next week. But
Okay.
thank you so much for joining us this week. And it was great doing shows from you up in Cooperstown. And to all the fans, thanks for listening and watching.